If you had told me 10 years ago that I'd be the one signing the bills for my mother-in-law's medications, I would have laughed in your face. Back then, she wouldn't even look me in the eye unless it was to glare. I was the girl who wasn't good enough for her golden boy. The girl with cheap shoes, student loans, and no pedigree to speak of. She doesn't even know which fork to use for salad, I overheard her say once at Thanksgiving dinner, loud enough to make the silence at the table heavier than the turkey. And yet I smiled, bit my lip, and offered her more gravy. That was the beginning. Or maybe the beginning came earlier when I first met her and she extended a hand so limp and cold. I wasn't sure if I was shaking flesh or ice. She was elegant, the kind of woman who wore pearls to brunch and still sent handwritten thank you notes. Her judgment was subtle but sharp, wrapped in politeness like a dagger inside silk. My clothes were too simple. My voice too loud. My family too modest. My dreams too silly for her taste. And worst of all, I'd stolen her son. Robert and I met in college. He was charming, tall, with that polished air of someone who always knew the right thing to say. He came from a well-off family in Connecticut, where ivy crawled up the brick walls of houses with names. I came from a small town in Ohio where we barely had a front porch, let alone a name for the house. But we clicked. He liked that I was ambitious. I liked that he was confident. And when we fell in love, it was quick and intense, like watching a fire catch on dry wood. The wedding was small, my side filled with warmth and laughter. His side cold, stiff, and silent. His mother wore navy instead of the traditional mother of the groom colors, as if mourning the event. She gave me a hug that felt more like a warning than a welcome. Robert didn't notice, or if he did, he pretended not to. He always played diplomat, smoothing things over with phrases like, "That's just how she is," or "She'll come around." But she never did. The first year of our marriage was hard, and not just because of the usual adjustments. Every family gathering felt like a battlefield disguised as a brunch. She'd comment on the way I decorated the house. "Very eclectic," she'd murmur, running a manicured finger across a thrift store vase I'd found on sale. She criticized my cooking, my clothes, even the way I greeted guests. "Try not to talk so much," she'd whisper once when I laughed too loud during dinner. "It's a bit unladylike." Tried. God, I tried. I read etiquette books, learned recipes from her generation, even asked her advice, though every answer came laced with condescension. "Well, dear, if you must work, at least don't forget your husband likes his shirts ironed properly." She never forgot to remind me I wasn't a real woman, not the kind of woman she imagined for her son. Robert, for his part, was torn. First, he defended me, told her to back off. But over time, the tension wore him down. I could see it in his eyes. He wanted peace more than he wanted justice. So he stopped defending. Then he started agreeing. Subtly at first. "Maybe you could try a different recipe," he'd suggest after one of her digs. "You do talk over people sometimes," he'd add later. Until one day, he said nothing at all when she told me I was lucky. He'd married me despite my background. By our 3rd anniversary, the man who once kissed my forehead every morning now came home late, distracted, already tired of the fight before even stepping through the door. We started drifting, he into his work, and I into silence. I smiled through clenched teeth at family dinners, became a master at pretending. Pretending not to hear the insults. Pretending I didn't care. Pretending I hadn't lost something I couldn't quite name. Still, I didn't leave. Not because I couldn't, but because I was determined. I was going to prove them wrong, all of them. I buried myself in work, started freelancing, then picked up real estate courses online at night. I studied during lunch breaks, learned the ins and outs of contracts and markets and negotiation. I networked like my life depended on it, because in a way it did. Meanwhile, his mother continued her silent sabotage. When I sold my first house, she smiled sweetly and asked, "How charming. A hobby, is it?" When I landed a big client, she blinked and said, "I'm sure Robert's salary is still the real safety net, though." I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled and nodded. My revenge, I decided, would be quiet and unstoppable. The turning point came one evening at a charity gala she invited us to. I wore a simple black dress, nothing flashy, but tasteful. She wore something expensive and bejeweled, and spent most of the evening introducing Robert to various eligible daughters of her social circle. "This is Clarissa. Went to Yale. Speaks fluent French. Volunteers with orphans," she said, her hand on Robert's arm, as if I wasn't standing right there. On the way home I didn't speak. Robert didn't either. And in that silence I realized something. I was done. Not with the marriage, not yet, but with the war. I would no longer beg for her approval. I would no longer twist myself into a shape that pleased her. I would build a life so solid, so self-sufficient, that her opinion would be dust in the wind. And so I worked harder. Took risks. I reinvested every cent I made. I learned from failures, celebrated small wins, and slowly, steadily, built a reputation. My name started to matter in circles she didn't even know existed. People started calling me instead of him. Clients trusted me. I became, in quiet increments, exactly the kind of woman she never believed I could be. But none of it mattered to her. Even as I bought us a better car, even as I paid off our mortgage, she clung to the fiction that I was barely managing. "Robert, you should be careful. If she gets too independent, she might stop needing you," she once whispered to him when she thought I was out of earshot. Too late. Already had. What came next no one expected. Not even me. But I'll save that for later. For now, just know this. Before she lived under my roof, before she ate the food I paid for, took the medicine I ordered, slept in the bed I gave her, I was the girl she despised. And I never forgot. I always thought poetic justice was something that happened in movies, not in living rooms painted cream with someone else's taste, while a woman who once belittled me now shuffled past with swollen ankles and a pill organizer in her hand. But there she was, my mother-in-law. Evelyn, once the queen of silk blouses and pursed lips, now wearing orthopedic sandals and asking me if the tea kettle was whistling. Let me rewind it a bit. It didn't happen all at once, and certainly not the way she might have imagined. Her fall from grace wasn't tragic, it was tedious, slow, a drip-drip of poor investments and worse pride. And all while Robert floated through life like a man who had no idea his parachute was full of holes. It started with the calls from creditors. Evelyn had made a few bad decisions after her husband died, decisions that included trusting a man named Garrett, who drove a Jaguar and promised double returns through something he called aggressive equity. Evelyn believed him, of course she did. She always thought charm was the same as character, and Garrett had both in spades. Robert tried to help. He gave her money from our joint account without telling me the first time, then the second time, and by the third time I started asking questions. He looked like a guilty schoolboy caught sneaking cookies. I told him she needed a financial advisor, not another blank check. But he insisted she just needed a little breathing room. Breathing room turned into a gasping collapse. She lost the house, the one she always said had been in the family for generations, as if bricks carried blue blood. She sold the antique furniture, the crystal she once said I couldn't polish properly, and the art that she claimed was European, though I always suspected it came from home goods. Then, one rainy afternoon, Evelyn showed up at our doorstep holding a suitcase that looked older than our marriage and a face full of pride and panic. I wasn't surprised. I had seen the storm coming from miles away, and I had built my shelter with documents and proof and a spine made of stone. She stood there, dripping like some ghost from a better time, and asked if she could stay just until she figured things out. I invited her in and handed her a towel. I didn't gloat, not yet, because the best part about poetic justice is that it unfolds slowly, like a fine wine or a bad smell. The first week, she stayed in the guest room and called it temporary. She arranged her few belongings with the same precision she once used to judge my holiday centerpieces. Every morning, she applied lipstick and perfume, as if dignity could be dabbed on like foundation. I admired her stubbornness, almost like watching a once famous actress still insisting on taking center stage, even as the curtains fall. She tried to maintain her old routines. She brewed weak coffee the way she liked it and offered critiques on everything from the curtains to my choice in podcasts. She even told me I should consider wearing something less practical around the house because Presentation matters. I smiled and said I'd consider it, then went back to folding laundry in peace. Then came the humiliations she couldn't hide. Her prescriptions cost more than she could afford, and I had to pick them up and pay without a word. She tried to pretend she would reimburse me. She even wrote a note on the fridge that said, "We'll pay you back," with a smiley face, as if emojis could cover decades of disdain. Robert stayed mostly quiet. He worked longer hours or pretended to, and when he was home, he was tense, as if he could feel the power shift but didn't know what to do with it. He avoided the kitchen, where I kept the receipts. Avoided the hallway, where his mother's expensive scarf now hung like a relic. And avoided me, because he knew I was tallying every moment like a banker counting debts. The irony deepened. Evelyn needed a dentist, her crown cracked. I scheduled the appointment. She needed rides to the clinic, I drove her. She needed to sign up for Medicare, I sat with her for hours on hold, listening to flute music and apologies. I did it all with the same calm she once mistook for weakness, but inside I was roaring. She never said thank you, not really. Her gratitude came wrapped in sarcasm or muttered behind closed doors. Once, I overheard her on the phone with a friend. "If you can call Doris a friend," she said something like, "Well, I suppose it could be worse. At least she keeps the house tidy and doesn't poison the food." I wanted to laugh, then cry, then laugh again. But the best moment, the best, came when I hosted a dinner party. Small, nothing fancy. Just close friends and a few colleagues. Evelyn insisted on attending. She wore pearls, of course, though they didn't shine like they used to, and tried to hold court with old stories and staler opinions. But when someone asked her where she lived now, her face froze and her wineglass trembled. She looked at me as if daring me to humiliate her. But I smiled sweetly and said, "Evelyn is staying with us for now, while she reorients herself financially." It was the kindest execution I'd ever delivered. No blood, no tears, just truth served at room temperature with a side of roasted chicken. Later, she cornered me in the hallway and asked why I had said it like that. I told her because it was true. And the days of pretending had ended. She looked at me for a long moment, and for the first time ever, I saw something crack in her eyes. Not hate, not pride, but something like acknowledgement. Not an apology, not quite, but close enough to keep me from cheering. Robert finally said what had been simmering for months, one night after dinner when Evelyn had gone to bed early. He looked tired, older maybe, and said, "I'm sorry. I should have protected you back then." I said I didn't need protection, I needed partnership. And maybe it was too late for some things, but not too late for clarity. Life moved on. Evelyn stayed. And stayed. And stayed. Every time I hinted she might be able to move in with a cousin, or find a senior living option, she found a new excuse. She became like wallpaper, impossible to remove without effort and a little destruction. But I didn't mind, not anymore. Because I had everything she once said I'd never achieve. A successful business, a warm home, loyal friends, a marriage that had found new footing, and most deliciously a sense of control she could never take away. She still critiques me sometimes. Still mentions how Clarissa from the country club married a senator. But now it rolls off my back like cheap wine on a raincoat because I know the truth. She lives in my house. She eats my food. She wears a robe I bought at Target. And she depends on me. And deep down she knows it. That's the real power. Not revenge. Not cruelty. Just persistence and the grace to smile when the woman who once judged your napkins now asks where you keep the toilet paper. She may have despised me once. But now she needs me. And oh, how the mighty have borrowed. It was a Tuesday morning when everything shifted. Not with a bang, not even with a whisper, but with a quiet thud, the sound of Evelyn's cane hitting the hardwood floor as she dropped it near the kitchen counter. I was slicing apples for a tart. The sun was warm on the countertop. There was nothing special about the day, and maybe that's why it felt so profound. She looked at me, her eyes tired, her posture a little slumped, and said, "I can't open the jar." It was raspberry jam. The same kind she used to bring over in glass jars with perfect handwriting on the labels when Robert and I were still newlyweds. Back then, she used to hand it to me with a tight-lipped smile, as if she expected me to spill it, stain the counter, or ruin toast. Now she held the jar in trembling hands and offered it like a truce. Took it. Opened it. She said, "Thank you," and sat down, letting the silence sit between us like steam. I thought of all the things she had said to me over the years, the subtle jabs, the overt criticisms, the moments she made me feel like an intruder in my own marriage. How she once told me I'd never be enough. How she said Robert needed someone more refined, more fitting. I had swallowed those comments like stones, letting them sink into my gut, letting them weigh me down for far too long. But now Evelyn needed help getting up the stairs. She needed help remembering which pills were taken in the morning and which were for night. She needed me to refill her prescriptions, reschedule her checkups, help her cut her nails. Every little task was a reversal of power. And I, surprisingly, felt no bitterness. What I felt was peace. There was something healing about caring for someone who once tried to break you. Not in a sweet, fairy tale redemption kind of way. No, it was real, raw, and often awkward. But it was honest. The house no longer echoed with tension. Instead, it settled into a new rhythm. Evelyn didn't pretend anymore. She no longer dressed for imagined guests or criticized the flavor of the soup. She wore slippers, drank the tea I brewed without complaint, and sometimes, just sometimes, asked me about my day. Robert noticed the change too. One evening, while we were watching a documentary and Evelyn had gone to bed early, he turned to me and said, "You're incredible, you know that?" I smiled without answering. I didn't need his validation, not anymore, but I appreciated that he finally saw it, not just my patience, but my strength. And then came the letter. A thick envelope addressed to Evelyn, written in her sister's handwriting. I handed it to her as she sat in her chair by the window. She opened it slowly, like it might contain poison. Her hands trembled as she read, and then she said something I never thought I'd hear. "My sister invited me to live with her." I said nothing. "She has a guest suite with a private bathroom." Still I waited. "She said I could move in next month if I wanted." The pause between us was louder than any argument we had ever had. I looked at her, this once proud woman who had spent years looking down on me, and I saw the uncertainty behind her eyes. Not fear of her sister, but fear of the unknown. Of leaving the comfort she had found not in luxury, but in reliability. "Do you want to go?" asked, my voice steady. She folded the letter in half. "I don't know." It was the most honest answer she had ever given me. The next morning I made pancakes. Evelyn liked pancakes, not that she ever admitted it, but I had noticed she always ate more on pancake days. She joined me at the table, and we didn't talk about the letter. We talked about the birds outside, about the rain that was coming, about the way the garden had started to bloom. A week passed, then two. The letter sat on the counter like a decision that hadn't been made. Then one afternoon, as I was folding laundry, Evelyn came into the room and said, "I think I'll stay, if that's all right." I turned to her, saw the vulnerability in her eyes, and nodded. "Of course." She exhaled like she had been holding her breath for years. That night I told Robert. He shrugged, then kissed me on the forehead and said, "You're a better person than most." I didn't feel like a better person. I just felt like someone who had survived something and maybe even grown stronger because of it. And that's when it happened. Evelyn started to change. Not overnight, but slowly. The way spring creeps in after a long, frozen winter. She began asking how my business was going, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. She started helping fold laundry, drying dishes, even offering advice on herbs to plant. Once she asked if I wanted to take a walk with her. We walked 2 blocks before she got tired, but she said it was the nicest weather she'd seen in years. There were still moments, of course, habits die hard. She still flinched when I wore jeans to a dinner party or mumbled under her breath when I burned the edges of the garlic bread. But she apologized. Evelyn actually apologized. It came in whispers, in the form of "I didn't mean to offend," or "I was hard on you back then, wasn't I?" And one evening over tea she finally said it. "I was wrong about you." I looked up, surprised. "I thought you were too soft, too ordinary. But you're not. You're steady. You're kind in a way I never was." You took care of me when you didn't have to, and I don't think I ever thanked you properly. I reached across the table, touched her hand and said, "You're welcome." There it was. Full circle. The woman who once treated me like an outsider had become someone I cared for. Not out of obligation, but out of a quiet, earned connection. Not love, not quite, but something close enough. Months passed. Life found a rhythm again. Evelyn's health stabilized. She no longer needed a cane. She even began volunteering at the library once a week, helping children pick out books. Sometimes she would bring home pastries, claiming they were on sale, but I knew it was her way of giving something back. And one day, while reorganizing the attic, I found an old photo album. Tucked inside was a picture of Evelyn and Robert when he was 5. Next to it was a note, a letter she had written but never sent addressed to me. It was dated from years ago, shortly after our wedding. The ink had faded, but the words were clear. "I'm afraid of losing my son. I see how much he loves you, and I'm terrified that one day he'll forget I was ever important. I know I've been cold. I don't know how to be soft. But I see the way you hold him when he's tired. I see the way you cook for him, laugh with him. Maybe you are exactly what he needs." I sat there, holding the letter, tears stinging my eyes. Not because I needed her approval, but because, deep down, I had wanted her to see me, really see me all those years ago. And now, in this attic, surrounded by dust and boxes, I finally had it. When I came downstairs, Evelyn was making tea. She looked at me, and something passed between us, something quiet, invisible, but undeniably real. She smiled back. And in that moment, I realized something important. I hadn't won a battle. I hadn't defeated her. What I had done was something harder. I had broken a cycle. I had chosen empathy over ego, presence over pride. And because of that, the woman who once despised me now trusted me, depended on me, respected me. She lives in my house. She shares my space. But more than that, she has become part of my story, not as a villain, but as proof that people can change, that relationships can evolve, and that sometimes the sweetest justice is simply becoming the person they said you'd never be. The daughter-in-law who stayed. The woman who endured. The one who rose without needing to step on anyone to do it.